Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I'm your host, JP John Poz, with today a very special guest, a writer, an author, a journalist. He is, of course, ESPN's own a future author of an NWO book coming out as well, Mr. Marc Raimondi. Mark, welcome to Two-Man Power Trip. How you doing?
Hey JP, how are you, man?
Doing good, doing very good. What's going on in your world? I know you've had a busy few days here.
Yeah, always busy in the combat sports world. There is no off season, as you well know. I was just over the weekend and most of last week in Las Vegas for UFC 285. It was the return of Jon Jones. He was going for the UFC heavyweight title. Of course, he is the longtime former UFC light heavyweight champion, and he won the UFC heavyweight title on Saturday night against Cyril Gahn. Really impressive performance. Very interesting and definitely very intriguing to see someone who people say is I would agree with this, the greatest of all time in mixed martial arts. The guy is 15-0 in title fights now. To see him return and come back and win the heavyweight title, pretty darn impressive. He's a guy that we're going to be talking about for a very long time, for decades to come. I would say not a lot of people are going to be breaking his records anytime soon.
Funny, I was just talking to a buddy of mine. We were talking about that. I'm not the biggest Jon Jones fan, but I said he's got to be, regardless, he's got to be in the Mount Rushmore, if you will, the top heavyweights. But he was saying he's the GOAT. And I was kind of going back and forth, like, I don't know. Like some of the guys he beat, they were, and then you could say he's got one of the best resumes ever. But I was like, I don't know. Rampage wasn't really in his prime. Was Hua in his prime? Was Belfort in his prime? Like you could kind of punch some holes in it, but now they went up to heavyweight and just dominated again, like he gone, like he was nothing. It's like I don't know, maybe maybe he is too good for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, 12 years after he won his first title, moves up to heavyweight and wins that title against one of the best guys in the world, and someone who a lot of people said that he was gonna have trouble with Gon because Gon is so fast, so agile. His striking is so precise, and Jones just went out there and dominated him. I really feel like, I mean, all things aside, and I know that you can put a few. You can throw a few, monkey wrenches in the resume because of a couple of drug test failures and of course all of the outside the cage issues that Jon Jones has had over the years. But in terms of just resume in the cage, I mean, the man has never really lost. His one loss was via disqualification in 2009 against Matt Hamill in a fight that he was completely dominating and probably should have never been a disqualification in the first place.
Right.
He's even if you want to put that against him, he's still 19. He's still unbeaten in 19 straight fights in the UFC, which no one has ever done before. He's 15-0 in title fights. I mean, people talk about, and I think Khabib Nurmagomedov is one of the best ever, but he was only 4-0 in title fights, 3 title defenses. Jones now is 15-0 with 11 title defenses. I mean, it's the resume is just outstanding, and to see him at 35 years old come win the heavyweight title on Saturday, I don't think there's a debate any longer. I mean, I know that there's going to be people who want to bring up the drug tests, but there are some caveats. I don't want to get too in the weeds, John, with that stuff. There's some caveats to the drug testing stuff too. I think Jon Jones' resume, achievements, accolades, he's the GOAT.
Beat DC twice, technically, Daniel Cormier. I know once it was
Good.
was the controversy with the steroids, but
That's right.
Cormier could be considered one of the all-time greats, and he beat him. So
100%.
yeah.
100%.
Plus, you throw in other wins like Bader and I know Stephan Bonner, people, whatever. But those are some pretty good wins along the way as well. I mean, he's pretty damn good. Glover, Teixeira,
Mhm.
Gustafsson twice. I mean, it's a pretty good resume.
Yeah, I mean, even like Machida was very good.
Yes, yes,
Machida was still in his prime when
yep.
Jones beat him back then. Rashad Evans was still in his prime when Jones beat him, and that was a fight that was a really big fight, but back then, and just to think of what he's been able to accomplish, you know, over the last 12 years. I mean, most MMA careers, they flame out quickly. It's a really hard sport to have longevity. And then if you look, John, at like the last few months in the UFC, you've seen longtime champions like Kamaru Usman, like Israel Adesanya, and even Saturday night Valentina Shevchenko all lose their titles. You make a mistake, you get knocked out or you get submitted, and that happened to all of those great champions. We're talking about some of the pound for pound best fighters in the world. It's never happened to Jon Jones. It's never happened to Jon Jones. Everybody gets caught. Everybody loses. Everyone has a bad night. They lose by decision, but not Jon Bones Jones. It's really freaking remarkable.
Though, in watching the Santos fight and the Dominic
Mhm.
Reyes fight, those are two weird fights where I scored both wins for Santos and Reyes. And I know obviously Jones really won the fight, but we're just watching it from the eyes. And I know people can go back and say Jones probably won them and this and that, but to me, way too close. I don't know if he was bored or what, but that was very like Jon Jones esque. Like I don't know what it was. Like he didn't want to do the fight. It just seemed like his head wasn't in the game. It's very opposite of what we saw Saturday night.
Yeah, no. Those were definitely not his greatest performances. And I actually did score both of them for Jones at the time. I went back and I watched the Reyes fight, and I definitely think that was incredibly close. And
Yeah,
either
super
either
close.
one,
Yep.
you definitely if you had Dominic Reyes winning that fight, who's going to argue with you? But yeah, I mean, I think, and from what I've been told by Jones's team, there was a little bit of a lack of motivation because, again, he had already beaten the generation before him at light heavyweight. He had already beaten everybody in like all of his contemporaries. His generation, the Daniel Cormiers, the Alexander Gustafsons, and now he was fighting the next generation of guys like the Santoses and the Reyeses. And I just think that they weren't really big names. I don't think he was getting up for those fights. Probably his paycheck wasn't going to be as big because the pay-per-view buys were not going to be as big. So I mean, I think that there might have been and I don't want to disrespect Thiago Santos and Dominic Reyes, both very good fighters, but probably not the most motivated guy. We saw a very motivated and focused Jon Jones on Saturday, and that's a scary man. When that guy is dialed in, that's a very scary fighter.
It'd be interesting to see who's next for him, right? Because Stipe seems like the
Stipe.
only
Mhm.
the only guy because Francis Ngannou is obviously gone, but it seems like
That's
Stipe
right.
is the only option.
It's gonna be Stipe for sure, 100%. That's the next fight, and it is that's a marquee fight. That's a marquee fight because Jones is the greatest light heavyweight of all time. Stipe Miocic is the best heavyweight as far as what he was able to achieve in the UFC. I know a lot of people say Fedor Emelianenko best heavyweight of all time. Certainly, there's a case. Never fought in the UFC though, but if you're talking about just the UFC, Stipe is the best. He's the best heavyweight in the history of that promotion. Jones is the best, and then it'll be two of the best, two future Hall of Famers going at it. Maybe sometime in the summer. That's a really really big fight for the UFC this year. I think other than Conor McGregor's return, I think that might be the biggest fight of the year for the UFC.
I feel like they need Jones and they need Connor just because it just seems like their pay per view were lagging. But now you got your two big guns back, and then that's a pretty damn good summer into the fall, into the winter for them.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really big year. Last year, I mean, as far as like the big money fights, there wasn't as many last year. But the UFC just keeps chugging along, and they do so well. Even the fights that are not we say big money, they're still doing incredibly well. They're still making a ton of money off of those fights. They are still they're still growing their fan base on ESPN Plus. I mean, certainly the UFC is not going anywhere or any kind of a downslide. May not have been the biggest year in 2022, but I do think that 2023 is going to be a really big one for them. You got Jones back. You got McGregor, who by the way, is already in Vegas. We saw him last week. He's coaching the Ultimate Fighter. They're filming that right now in Vegas, and that's going to be out in the summer. I think beginning in May, and it'll run on ESPN all summer. So that's also big. Just having Conor on the Ultimate Fighter, that's going to do big numbers, and that'll set up that big fight with him and Michael Chandler probably toward sometime in the latter half of the year. They're not exactly sure exactly when, whether it'll be September or maybe November at MSG or December. I would probably, if I had to put money on it, I would probably say closer to December. But either way, it's going to most likely happen. Very, 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 very good chance it happens in 2023. And another big fight. I mean, and there's big fights coming up for big rematches coming up for the UFC. Those champions that I mentioned who had lost, Kamaru Usman and Israel Adesanya, they're getting their shot back to try to get the titles in those bouts they lost coming up in the next couple months. So yeah, I think it's gonna be a very, very big 12 months for the UFC.
Man, Johnny Bones Jones and Stipe is definitely a fight I'm really looking forward to. That's going to
Mhm.
be awesome. Regardless, I think that's going to be awesome. To me, though, Chandler, I love him. Always loved him. Bellator. Always was a big fan of him. But to me, never always fought like the smartest fights. And Connor seems like he's a high IQ fighter. So that kind of seems like trouble for Chandler. I know Connor's been off, but that just seems like trouble for Chandler to me because he just seems like he takes too many risks. And Connor's so smart, he'll just pick him apart.
I mean, you make a very good point, John. I mean, and I think even Michael Chandler would not necessarily dispute that because he's an action fighter. He is an exciting fighter,
Yeah.
and sometimes that means making the decision to throw caution to the wind rather than taking the more the more safe route to a victory. Michael Chandler was a phenomenal wrestler at the University of Missouri. He was on the same team back then with Tyron Woodley and Ben Askren, who were also great wrestlers at Mizzou.
Yeah.
And he has that ability to put you on your butt. And he doesn't use it all that often because he is an action fighter. And you know what? But here's the thing: it's like that's why people love Michael Chandler because he does fight that way. Even if maybe it would be easier for him to win, the path is a little bit quicker with some takedowns, mixing in that wrestling, some top control. That's not what he wants to do. He wants to get out there and put on a show. And to be honest, that's why he's in this position. That's why he is the opponent for Conor McGregor because it's an exciting fight. That's what people want to see. That's what Conor wants in his return fight. That's what the UFC wants in Conor's return fight. So that's kind of what makes Chandler who he is. And yeah, he's a great guy. I mean, I've known Chandler now for I think it's over 10 years, and just a gentleman, a class act, and I'm so happy for him that he's getting this fight because a few years ago he was in Bellator. He was had that weird. He lost his title in a weird way at MSG when he got his leg kicked and it
Yeah.
hit him
Brent
a nerve
Primus.
and he had like
Yeah.
a drop foot. And to see him then, uh, and now he's fighting Conor McGregor a few years later. It's pretty cool, and he definitely deserves it.
What's up with the USADA testing or the drug testing for Connor? Does he have to be in it for a certain period of time to make sure? Is that like the holdup for it?
Yes, that's a great question. Yes, so that is one of the things that is, I guess, I wouldn't say an issue, but it's one of the things kind of playing into when the fight is going to be. McGregor needs to be in the USADA drug testing pool for a span of 6 months before he can compete again. So it's March now. 6 months from now is already September. So if that fight was going to happen in September, McGregor would have to be already in the pool or getting into the pool like as we speak. And I did ask USADA last week, and they said nothing has changed. He was not in the pool as of late last week, so not sure if anything has changed in the last few days. But that's kind of why I say that maybe December it makes a little bit more sense because he's not in the pool yet. He's filming The Ultimate Fighter, and then he'll go back to Ireland. He'll probably get in the pool, get into a training camp, and get ready for that fight later this year.
Is there a reason why a fighter wouldn't jump in the pool earlier rather than later? Is there is he injured or what's the reasoning behind it?
Well, the original reasoning behind it was that he had that broken leg in the fight against Dustin Poirier in July 2021. So he broke his gosh he broke I can't think of the name. I think it's the tibia, right? In the and maybe the fibula and tibia he broke in that fight against Dustin Poirier, which is almost 2 years ago now. So I think that he went out of the drug testing pool because he was rehabbing. And I mean, I know some people are going to say like, "Oh, well, what was he doing? When he wasn't in the pool?" It's a good question. Well, whatever he was or was not doing, it has to be out of his system before he goes back into the drug testing pool. And
Right.
and I mean, he's also supposed to disclose to USADA everything that he did. So it might be a little bit of a loophole in the UFC's anti-doping program in USADA's anti-doping policy with the UFC. But that's what it is. And he's out of the pool. He's got to be in it for 6 months. He has to test negative in at least 2 tests before he can get back into the cage and disclose anything that he did during his time off if he was taking stuff to rehab. I mean, it's a broken bone, and he's an elite level athlete. He probably needs certain things to rehab such a devastating injury if you're going to get back and fight. If you're going to get back and throw kicks again and get kicked in the leg again, you're not going to be taking the same stuff that maybe you or I would take if we broke our legs. So that's kind of what it is. And I don't. I mean, I know that he got a lot bigger during the time off. You can see it on his Instagram. He looks
Yep.
pretty. He looks pretty. He's a body guy now, as they would say in the world of pro wrestling. But
Yep.
look, that's all happenstance and hearsay, and we don't know what he did or what he didn't do. So can't really speculate on that. But yeah, he does need to be in the pool for 6 months, and he's got to pass at least 2 tests before he can get back in there.
Were you surprised he didn't go for like a boxing fight or something next? So, not to avoid, obviously, you're not going to get kicked in boxing, but almost that would be a little bit easier for him. And he may even make more money doing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a possibility with McGregor. There was a point before the Poirier fights got booked that him and his team were talking very seriously with Manny Pacquiao. Didn't
Right.
end up
Yeah.
happening. And he ended up taking the Poirier fights that year in 2021. And look, him and his team are always having those types of conversations. And there was even reports out of the UK, I think, or maybe it was Ireland a few months ago that he was in talks again with Floyd Mayweather. I don't think there was any real truth to that stuff, but the fact is that he's under contract with the UFC, and he can't do anything outside the UFC without them giving the go ahead and without them really promoting him in that fight. So if the UFC wants him to get back in the octagon and fight somebody over there, that has to be his top priority. I think he has. Depending on who you ask, he has 2 or 3 fights left on his UFC contract. I think his team would say 2. I think the UFC says 3. So we'll see how that shakes out.
So right now, it looks like the second best heavyweight in the world, Francis Ngannou, because John Bones Jones might be number one.
I still would say Francis Ngannou is the best heavyweight in the world.
What's his status?
Free agent, very likely going to box at some point. Against who? Don't know. I know he said that he wants to box possibly this summer. I think that there might be some offers out there for him to box one of the bigger names, whether that's like a Deontay Wilder or Tyson Fury seems to be tied up with Alexander Usyk. I don't think he's going to be Tyson Fury and Ngannou anytime soon. Anthony Joshua's a guy out there. These are all things that him and his team are kind of dealing with and trying to figure out, to see what's next. But it doesn't seem like there's going to be any kind of reconciliation with the UFC anytime soon, unfortunately, because, man, Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones would have been a monster fight. My goodness. That
Yep.
would have been, I mean, that's one of the biggest fights the UFC can put on, again, outside of a McGregor fight. That is a big, big, big money fight. And it's just a bummer that it can't happen because of, it's almost like people talk about boxing and how they don't get those fights to happen. And the UFC is usually really good about getting the fights that fans want to see to happen. But in this case, they just could not come to terms with Ngannou. It's unfortunate. It really is unfortunate for both sides. And we'll see what Francis does next. Maybe I think he'll fight again in MMA. I don't know if that's with the Bellator or a PFL or even, somewhere overseas. But I do think he'll box this year, and maybe he'll even fight in MMA this year too. It'll be interesting to see what he does because, how many times, if ever, I don't think since Randy Couture has a sitting UFC champion left as a free agent. It's like, it's so rare. So all eyes will be on Francis Ngannou this year to see, what he does. And if it's a success, whatever he does, you might see other fighters, trying to take that risk and rolling the dice. The problem is that, once you kind of have that, that butting heads with the UFC, maybe they don't want you back. And look, as good as Francis Ngannou is, the UFC is a freaking machine, and they just keep chugging along. No one fighter is going to, tie them up. They're going to keep chugging along and they're going to keep doing good business with their fight nights and their pay-per-views and their big fights. And then it's hard to stop that train is rolling downhill, with or without Francis. I love him and I want to see him fight. And I hope he gets paid, everything that he wants, but the UFC machine is going to keep rolling.
To me, it's crazy. It's like arguably the best heavyweight. He's the heavyweight champion. I know he's stripped, but he's technically the champion, and he could show up like at Bellator or something. And
Mm-hmm.
I know it's one of those things you're like,
Maybe he can pull a Medusa and put the UFC title in the
throw in the
trash. Go
garbage.
to Bellator and on
Yeah,
Showtime, put it in the trash.
yeah, that's not a bad idea at all. It's actually a pretty good idea. The only thing is, it's like, is it the money though? Like, would Bellator be able to afford him if he wants as much money as he wants?
It wasn't even so much of a money issue with Ngannou. Certainly, money is a part of it, but I do think that the UFC was offering him enough money that that he would accept it. I don't think the amount of money was really in question. The issue with Ngannou is that he's always wanted to box. He's always wanted to box, and this is a guy. I'm not sure how familiar you are with his story, but he was digging, he was digging in mines and digging, freaking, basically digging ditches in Cameroon. That was his upbringing. That's what he did his whole, childhood into early adult life. And his goal was to get out of Cameroon and stop what that manual labor there and become a boxer. And that's how he ended up in France. It's a crazy story. But he was able to flee Cameroon, go across the Mediterranean, and he ended up in France. He was in prison for a little bit in Spain. It's a crazy story, but it was all about boxing. Is my point. It was all about boxing. He did all that because he wanted to box. It just so happened that at the time he found an MMA gym in France, and they turned him into a devastating MMA fighter. And he was really good at that, and that's how he started, on that path. But the dream for him was always boxing, and he wanted to do that while still being in the UFC. But that's just not, their contracts don't allow for fighters. McGregor did it against, of course, Mayweather, but that was a very rare occurrence where the UFC was a part of that deal and what have you. And it wasn't even written into McGregor's contract. It was something that the UFC did kind of like outside the scope of that. So Ngannou, I think, would have stayed in the UFC if they said, "Hey, yeah, you can go box. We'll let you go box, and you can come back and and fight." The UFC just doesn't. They don't operate that way. That's not how they run their business. And then another issue is that the UFC and really all MMA promotions, they have some pretty restrictive policies in their contracts where, okay, the contract is over. Okay, great. Well, it's not really over, because the UFC has a certain amount of time, whether it's a 30-day or 90-day exclusive negotiating window with you. And then once that exclusive negotiating window is up, there's a 1-year matching clause. So Francis would have taken a 3-year deal with the UFC. I'm sorry, a 3-fight deal with the UFC. But at the end of those 3 fights, the contract's not over. There's still that negotiating window, and then there's another year after that. And that was really the big holdup with Ngannou, is that they would not waive those 2 clauses, and those clauses are in every single UFC contract. They would not waive those 2 clauses, and therefore he said no. It's risky. He's rolling the dice, certainly, but he just said it would be too restrictive. He's also, I think he's 36. He's kind of in the latter part of his 30s now, so he probably doesn't want to go box when he's 40. He probably knows he's in his mid 30s now. Now's the time to do it. He's still in his athletic prime. Why wait? Then who knows what happens? Maybe you don't get a fight right away. The contract gets extended, and then who knows? So he's kind of rolling the dice now. The problem is that will the door be open for him to come back to the UFC? Doesn't seem like it from what Dana White has said.
To me, arguably, probably the hardest hitter ever in MMA, right? Some of the best knockouts, the Overeem knockout's unbelievable. Rosentrick, whatever, however you pronounce it, that knockout was great. That was like it's just unbelievable how hard he hits. Versus boxers, though, is he the hardest hitter, or would he not be the hardest hitter?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I don't know the answer to that. And in boxing, it's there's similarities, certainly, and Francis Ngannou is going to train in boxing, and he's going to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and train in wrestling. Boxers only train in boxing. That's all they do, day in and day out. They train in boxing, and there's a lot more nuance to it, and it's a lot more technical than the boxing that's done in MMA. Just because of the circumstances, right? Because you can't have pure technique as far as boxing and MMA, because you'll get your butt taken down or you'll get kicked in the head. So you can't box like a boxer in MMA. So he would have to go back, and really work on that boxing. And, Deontay Wilder hits awfully, awfully, awfully hard. Does he hit harder than Ngannou? I don't know. But look, I'd watch that fight, John. I mean, if they do Deontay Wilder versus Francis Ngannou, I think a lot of people are going to watch that, because those are 2 guys that can absolutely crack. And that's not going to decision. Someone's getting knocked out in that one.
Oh, I would sign up for that all day. That would be an awesome fight. Somebody's getting KO'd. That's like a guarantee. Somebody's getting knocked out. Yeah. So I'm just always curious, like, who's the best fighter? Who's the great fighters? It seems like Bellator does have some guys that are on UFC's radar that's shockingly not in UFC, like AJ McKee Jr. It's like
Yes.
that guy is so good. How did UFC miss him? There's a couple other guys, maybe in one and a couple other things. Are the best fighters in UFC anymore? Or is that not the case?
I would say the UFC has the majority of the best fighters, but there are a lot of really good fighters outside the UFC. I was in Japan over the winter during the holidays, and I covered the Ryzen versus Bellator card at Saitama Super Arena, and I mean Ryzen has really talented fighters.
Yep.
Bellator has really talented fighters. AJ McKee was the headliner on that card. That guy is really good. He's probably he's certainly a top 10 featherweight. And maybe even a top 10 lightweight. He's moved up. So and then Patricio Pitbull, same thing. He was on that card as well in Japan.
Yep.
He's the best fighter in Bellator history. Put it this way, John. We're talking about Michael Chandler. Pitbull knocked him out in a round.
That was
At
one of the
not even
fights I was thinking
Pitbull's
of.
fight.
He fought Pitbull. He just went right for him. Pitbull. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, it's not how you fight Pitbull. Come on.
Pitbull knocked him
Yeah.
out in a round, and
Yep.
Pitbull was up a weight class.
Yep.
He's a 45er fighting Chandler at 55. Chandler's a big old 55er, and he knocks him out in a round. Pitbull is a world-class fighter. World-class fighter. So Bellator has some really good fighters. Another guy that I want to mention, since you brought it up, Vadim Nemkov,
Oh, my
protege of Fedor,
favorite. Yeah.
the Bellator light heavyweight champion. That guy is excellent. I mean, there is a case to be made that he's the best light heavyweight in the world. And the guy is absolutely outstanding. Johnny Eblen is the middleweight champion of Bellator. The top of most of Bellator's divisions are elite fighters. And there's elite fighters in one. There are elite fighters in Ryzen. There's elite fighters in PFL. PFL has some really good fighters. MMA has never been deeper. It's never been deeper. Gone are the days of, there only being a handful of really good technical fighters in the world. Now there's great fighters everywhere, and it's great. The sport is really doing well right now.
Even I guess it's Usman. He's great at 155. They got
Oh,
a bunch of good guys.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure when we're coming out with this, JP. But Usman Nurmagomedov fights this weekend against
Yeah.
former Bellator lightweight champion Benson Henderson, and that's in the Bellator lightweight World Grand Prix. Which I also love that about Bellator, that they try to do things differently. They do tournaments
Yep.
and you don't want to be. This is the same thing with in pro wrestling too. Like, you don't want to be WWE light. You want to differentiate. Maybe you want to have a Texas death match with Hangman Page and Jon Moxley at,
Right.
at Revolution and have just a bloodbath. It's different. Bellator does different stuff, and that I think it's a positive thing. And yeah, Usman Nurmagomedov, his coaches say that he might even be better than Khabib one day, his cousin, of course. And he's an absolute stud at 55. I mean, if you get a chance to watch that kid, I mean, he's still in his early 20s. I think he's 24. Yeah, I think he's 24, 25 now. He is an absolute stud, and he's going to be around a long time, and he's going to be probably dominating for a long time.
It's funny, these Russian guys, they're like, oh my God. Even Amasov, who I know is I guess he's more Ukrainian than Russian,
Ukrainian, yeah.
but he's undefeated. It's like all these guys are
Oh God.
unbelievable. And Bellator
I
said
can't believe
all
I
their
didn't
champs
mention
are
Amasov talking about Bellator champions. That guy
yeah.
is phenomenal. I mean, that guy can go fight Kamaru Usman or Leon Edwards tomorrow, and that would be a competitive freaking fight. I mean, Amasov is an absolute stud. Stud.
Logan Storley, it's so funny. He's like, this guy's been training the whole time. That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, did he go to war or was he been training this whole time? I was like, holy crap, he killed him.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Yeah.
In Eastern Europe, they do a lot of wrestling and sambo, starting from a very young age, and those are just martial arts that translate incredibly well to MMA, and
Yep.
and their style of wrestling translate well to MMA. And like sambo, I mean, sambo is basically like kind of like MMA. I mean, it's kind of what they're striking in it. There's submissions, there's wrestling. There are a lot of aspects of MMA. So if you're doing that from a young age, you're gonna be ahead of the game. Coming in against people who are only doing wrestling or only doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu or only doing striking. You're going to be doing a little bit of everything.
Fedor, why he was so good and nobody
Yeah,
realized that you guys a Samba world
yeah,
champion. Yeah.
absolutely.
Who do you think though, when you look at just the grand scheme of things in all time like MMA, who's on the Mount Rushmore for you?
Oh boy, this is a hard one. I mean, it's so tough because I mean, Jon Jones is certainly there.
Yeah.
And the reason why I think it's tough is because it's how do you judge a fighter? Do you judge the entire body of work, or do you just judge their prime years? Because like, and the reason why I say this is because someone like Anderson Silva, if you look at his record in the tail end of his UFC career, doesn't look very good. Do you hold that against him? Do you keep him out of that Mount Rushmore because in his 40s he wasn't as good, and he was getting beaten by guys who he would have never gotten beaten by years earlier. But I mean, if you put me on the spot, definitely Jon Jones is up there. Definitely George St. Pierre is up there. I think I would put Anderson Silva up there for the sheer fact that he started his UFC career 16-0. I mean, that's just absurd. Absurd. And then the fourth spot, it could be a Khabib Nurmagomedov. It could be a Jose Aldo. I mean, it could be a Demetrius Johnson. Can't forget him. He had an incredible run, 11 title defenses at flyweight. There's a lot of people that I would consider for that fourth spot. I don't have a definitive person in that fourth spot, and some of these guys are still going. Demetrius Johnson's still fighting, so
No
he's
Fedor.
still.
Wow. Huh.
Well, I mean, Fedor is, and that's another guy that I bring up. Do you judge him based on the results later on in his career? And I don't want to, but he lost to Dan Henderson, who was a middleweight, in Strikeforce, so it's just hard to say. I mean, Fedor is an all-time great. There's no doubt, and there's a case to be made that he's the best heavyweight of all time. He did beat just about all of his like contemporaries, like all the other best heavyweights, because he was in the UFC, but at that time the best heavyweights were in Japan. They were all in Pride. The
Yeah.
Nogueiras, the Crow Cops. I mean, they were all in Pride, and he beat them. So yeah, I mean, Fedor's another guy that I guess you have to consider for that. But it's so hard because the UFC is you're really fighting. If you're at that level of the UFC, you're fighting the absolute best guys every single time. Not that Fedor didn't, but there was a stretch where he didn't, right? There was a stretch that he didn't. Whereas if you're in the UFC, there's really not a lot of there's no tune-up fights. Like even if you lose the title, your next fight is going to be a bad MRFer.
Definitely, for sure. I would say Fedor, Anderson Silva, GSP, Jon Jones for me would be mine, but I ignore like the latter part. Like
Right.
I stick to the prime because Anderson Silva, man, like he beat Hendo, he beat Rich Franklin pretty easily. I mean, pretty impressive like resume, guys.
Oh
He
yeah.
destroyed Forrest Griffin, who's a weight class above him, who was a champion. So yeah, he's got to be considered for sure.
100%. 100%.
Changing gears though, let's go pro wrestling.
Let's go. My first love.
Your first love here, my wheelhouse, your first love. Saw you on the A&E doc. What was that experience like? Because obviously you're doing something with the NWO with the book, so
Mhm.
it kind of correlates and it kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah, so they reached out to me. I guess it was last summer or before last summer, and they asked me to do it. And very professional. I mean, the director Ross Hockrow, producer Gary Cohen, just real professionals. Gary Cohen did a ton of ESPN 30 for 30s. I think he did like almost like half of like the catalog. He was very involved with doing the 30 for 30s, which are always excellent
Yeah, they're
productions.
the best. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a really great crew, and they interviewed me one day I live in LA. They interviewed me one day in LA. I think it was August, and it was in like a warehouse, and it was like 90 something degrees, and there was no air conditioning in the warehouse, but we made it work. I think they were bringing me like towels to like that the sweat coming out of
Yeah, yeah.
my brow. But I thought it really came out great. I thought that it was shot incredibly well with the interviews, and also with Eric Bischoff at his home in Cody, Wyoming. I thought it came out really, really well. That the narrative was really well done. I thought they hit a home run with that. I really did, and I'm not just saying that because I was in it. I really did. I really thought they hit a home run with the whole thing.
I was just talking to Bischoff, and I told him, I go, if you go back and you watch that, Sting kind of Starcade '97 kind of gets his arm up. I go, just run with that, and not don't say it's a fast count. Just make the excuse that he got his hand up.
Uh,
He's like, where were you
yeah.
in '97? Like, like, come on.
I can't believe I said the words "wet fart" on national television. I don't know if I'll ever live that one down. That was
Hey, perfect analogy though. That's kind of what it was.
uh,
That was
I've
terrible.
I've gone back and I've watched, of course, for research for the book. I've watched. I think I'm around the 400-hour mark of
Awesome.
WCW from '96 until '99, and I'm not done yet. But I'm in like I'm around 400 hours, and I really just enjoyed the '97. I thought was just a phenomenal year. I really, really enjoyed that year. That was my favorite year when I went back and I watched, and especially the latter half of the year, the build to Hogan Sting was just excellent. The DDP Randy Savage stuff, excellent. I really, really enjoyed that. And then what should have been the blow off of all blow offs, right? The build was the fact that they had the balls. I can say that, right? The fact that they
Oh
had
yeah,
the
yeah,
testicular fortitude to not have Sting wrestle for a year, to build that match, not have him talk, not have him wrestle, to build that match. I mean, it takes guts to do that because Sting is the franchise guy. And then the match itself happened. And what can I say? I mean, but '98 was still. I haven't talked with Eric about this yet, but I know that I said on the documentary that that was the beginning of the end. I know '98 was an excellent year financially for WCW. It was actually the best year
yeah.
financially for WCW. So it wasn't the beginning. It wasn't the beginning of the end of the business. But for me, I meant the NWO. I thought that was the beginning of the end of the NWO because a few months later there was a Wolf Pack and things were very disjointed and things just never seemed as cohesive and as strong as before Starrcade '97, at least for the NWO. I know WCW is still doing great, Goldberg and what have you.
Man, they fired six. They split up Hall and
Mm,
Nash. They had a feud with each other. It was
mhm.
like the real Wolfpack is Hall, Nash, and Six. Like
I
keep
know,
those guys together. Like come on, that
I
was
know.
just they screwed that up big time. And they were so on fire when they first started the NWO. I mean, it was
Oh,
unbelievable how much they were on fire.
I mean, there will never be anything like that again. It was lightning in a bottle, and it was just all the right people in place, the right situation, the right climate. It was just like, I mean, it was just kismet. It was like a shooting star where everything aligned, and it came out with the biggest and the best pro wrestling storyline probably ever. I mean, certainly the most influential. I would argue, and I will try to argue in my book that's coming out in quite a few months from now, quite a
Yeah.
few maybe a couple of years from now. But yeah, I think that's what it was. That's what ignited the '90s wrestling boom. It was the NWO. That was the catalyst. That was the match that set that ablaze.
I always say it to people because they were thinking, "Oh, Attitude Era," right? I was like, "No, it was really Monday Night Wars technically, but it was really the
Right.
NWO because everybody and all my friends, I mean, we're all around. I don't know how old you are, but me and my friends were all around 40, and that was
Mhm.
our era. We all were watching WCW, NWO, and then flipped over. It wasn't
That's right.
that we just showed up and watched WWF. No, we were watching WCW and then
That's
flipped
right.
over because of Austin.
That's right. And funny enough, Eric Bischoff was doing the evil boss before Vince McMahon was doing the evil boss
Yeah, he was the
character
OG.
on the other
Yep,
on the other channel. He really was.
yep.
And I know that Vince gets credit for it, deservedly so. Phenomenal. One of the best characters in the history of wrestling. But Eric Bischoff was actually doing that a version of that character before Vince McMahon was. And WCW was bringing in celebrities like Dennis Rodman before, Mike Tyson came in and helped kind of start the Attitude Era. And I don't mean any of this to disparage WWE or WWF and the Attitude Era. I'm from New York, so certainly the WWF is kind of near and dear to me because it was in my backyard. But I mean, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't glued to Nitro every Monday. I was flipping that Monday. I mean, as you know, I'm 38, so when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, Monday night was I mean, I'm on the couch and there is
Yeah.
nothing moving my butt from the couch flipping between those two shows. I mean, that was my life. It was my friend. It was, me and my friends in school. I'm kind of rambling now, but I actually, after the documentary aired, I heard from a friend of mine from elementary school, who I haven't heard from in many years. And he reached out and he said he saw the documentary and he said, "How cool is this? You know, we were talking about that as kids at school, and now you're, on a documentary talking about it. It's kind of crazy."
That is surreal, right? That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even for me, like getting to talk to Bischoff, I've interviewed Hall, Nash,
Mhm.
Six, Hogan, shockingly, somehow, some way. Like talking to them, it's like, holy crap, you guys literally like we were obsessed. Like that was our whole
Yeah.
life. We would pick like your Hall, your like, and not like to be a gang, quote unquote, at school, but like for
Yeah.
fun, you know what I mean? And
Of
we
course.
football together, like it was like all NWO. We had the shirts. I mean, it was like an obsession. It was crazy.
Absolutely. I'm wearing an NWO shirt right now. I'm wearing a Muda shirt.
Oh wow, nice, awesome
Got
shirt,
like
nice.
NWO on the
Yeah,
yeah.
nice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it was the biggest thing going. It was the biggest thing going in pop culture, especially in our demographic, for younger men, teen boys at that time. That was it. That was the biggest thing in the freaking country. That was the bit. Everyone was watching it. Everyone was talking about it. It was like viral before that was even a thing, if
Yep.
that makes any sense.
Even, like, friends' parents would be like, "Hogan turned bad," like, that was a huge thing, "Hogan turned bad," like, everybody was
Oh man.
obsessed with the, NWO, yeah.
I actually remember being a kid and I was at I think I was like I think I was working as like I wasn't like a full counselor because I think I was only like 12 or 13. So I was like a counselor in training, I think, at a day camp in Queens, New York. That's where I grew up, Queens, New York.
Nice.
And Bayside, Queens, this day camp, and I was a counselor in training. And Sunday was Bash at the Beach. Of course, everyone watched it. And then Monday we got to this camp, and it was the talk of this freaking camp. Hulk Hogan turning bad. I don't think I was using the word heel back then, and at 12 years old or 13 years old, but that was absolutely the biggest. Like everyone came to camp and were like, "Oh my god, did you watch pay-per-view last night? Hogan turned," and it was I remember this vividly because it made that big of an impression, on me at the time. Just that buzz, that feeling. And now I have to try to find a way to adequately write about this very important part of a lot of people's lives in a book.
Yes.
So wish me luck.
So it's gonna take a while, right? Because I mean, you got a lot of, research ahead of you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's no target, publishing date or anything. I'm still working on it. Um, I hope to. I mean, I'm not sure about announcing anything anytime soon, but hopefully before the end of the year, I can announce something. I'm not exactly sure. The publisher, Simon and Schuster, they've been super supportive. And my editor, Yadon Israel, was a fan. I mean, it was. I mean, this is also his baby too because he was a fan and it was very influential for him. As a teen or as a a young man growing up. So we've been working together, and yeah, I mean, it's I am taking the responsibility extremely seriously. And I feel like this is what I look. I've been a journalist. I've been a sports journalist for my entire adult life for 17, 18 years. Been covering combat sports for 10 years, and I'm taking this very seriously. I'm going to apply everything that I've learned and everything that I've done so far, and I'm going to put it toward making this the best possible you know book and the best possible, most accurate, the most in-depth story that you'll read on the NWO. So I'm gonna do my best. I feel the pressure, John. I feel the pressure. It's a big
Yeah.
thing. It's a big thing.
Man, this has been building for decades for you. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
the big thing. When you look at it, though, do you think that it's remembered as fondly, like as it should be, because WB kind of WBIs his stuff, and it kind of makes it seem like it's not as important if it didn't happen to WB. Do you think that NWO is remembered as it should be, as being the game changer it was?
I think so. I do think so. I mean, certainly for the people that are around our age, I think that people do remember that being extremely impactful and extremely influential to what was the '90s wrestling takeover, the wrestling boom. I think WWE's done a pretty darn good job telling those stories. I mean, they inducted those guys into the Hall of Fame as the NWO. That was pretty interesting. So I think they have, but There's never been a book. There's never been a book about it, and there is a level of detail and a level of depth that you can go into in a book that, and this is my opinion. I might be biased. I'm a writer. Um, I just feel like you can go a little bit deeper in a book than you can in a 30-minute or a 90-minute or a 2-hour documentary. I feel like there's a lot, there's a lot more depth you can really get into. And this book is also about, how this influenced pop culture, how this influenced the country, because people, I stand by this, people who were watching then, people who were around our age, mid 30s, early 40s, mid 40s, we are all professionals, and we're all doing something right now, and that left a stamp on us. That left us, whether we even know it or not, whether it's conscious or subconscious, watching that back then influenced us. And one of the things that I want to accomplish with this book is to show that. And I'll be talking to some people. I don't want to give too much away, but I'll be interviewing people who are in certain industries now, whether it be entertainment or politics or what have you, that or music, that were influenced by the NWO, and now they are who they are, and they're putting out art, or they're putting out a product that was impacted by that, 20 something years ago. That's one of the things that I'm also trying to accomplish with the book.
I did love that part of the documentary because that's so true. It literally was embedded in culture. And anytime I watch a show or look at a show or even go to a show, I was at a show last night for
Mm-hmm.
WWE. I just want to say, like, I wonder how many NWO shirts, and invariably one or two every crowd. I was at a concert over the summer, just randomly.
Yep.
Of course, I had my Hogan shirt on, of course, my Hogan NWO shirt on too. So people noticed, but I was like, oh, there's an NWO shirt. There's a Steve Austin. I was like, oh, there's another NWO shirt. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
always NWO shirts. It's nuts. Still, 20
Still,
years later.
still. I mean, Kevin Durant was just wearing that a year ago or 2 years ago when he was
Yeah.
with the Nets. When
Yep.
they got those three guys, he was wearing an NWO logo on his jacket. I mean, Kylie Jenner was wearing an NWO shirt a
Yeah.
few years ago. Aziz Ansari wore an NWO shirt when he was hosting Saturday Night Live. I mean, this is what I mean when I say that there is an impact there. There is an influence there that is still being felt over 2 decades later.
Now, I got in not an argument, but I was talking to somebody and they were going, "Oh, you have the list of," because I don't remember what the heck I was doing, but I was listing the NWO guys in order, and they're like, "Oh, NWO Sting," and I was like, "He doesn't count," and they're like, "Oh, what do you mean he doesn't count?" And I said, "First of all, it's not NWO Sting until he goes to Japan. He was bogus Sting or fake Sting when he was on WCW, and remember he attacked Luger."
Uh-huh.
I was like,
Of course.
Hole and Nash even said it to Sting. They're like, "Oh, we just did that because we knew about imitators, fake
Mm.
Razor, fake Diesel,"
Uh,
and we like, "We want you to break on through to the other side." So, do you consider fake Sting a member of the initial NWO when you put it into the timeline?
It's hard because there were several members who were kind of like that, where were they members, were they, and he's one of those guys that, I mean, Bret Hart is kind of one of those guys because he was sort of in the NWO when he came in, but not really. I mean, you never saw that guy wear an NWO shirt, really. He was always wearing his own, merchandise. And I don't know if there ever was any Bret Hart NWO merchandise. I'm not sure if there ever was.
I don't think
So
so.
it's hard to say. I mean, certainly he does count because, like you said, he went to Japan and he was doing those tours of New Japan, and he was teaming with, like, the Scott Nortons of the world, and the Tenzans of the world, who I interviewed for the book, by the way. Tenzan, great guy.
Wow,
Tenzan's
awesome!
fun.
He's a
Yeah,
god. Yeah, I love him.
yeah,
Yeah,
he's awesome. So I mean, eventually, certainly, you got to put Jeff Farmer as a member of the NWO. But initially, I understand what you're saying, because he was just kind of the
it would
imposter.
throw off the six. Wouldn't be
He was.
six if you counted it in order. You know what I
It's
mean?
true.
Yeah,
It would, yeah, because Sean Waltman would technically not be the sixth member if you were including NWO Sting
he'd be
before
seven.
him.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
he'd be the seventh, because it was Hall, Nash, Hogan, DiBiase,
giant,
Giant, and
and then
then
six.
right, exactly.
And Fake Sting was in there around the time of the Giant, but
That's right.
he wasn't really a member. That's why I always say he
That's
wasn't
right.
really. And then you throw in Vincent, of course, and Buff. But do you think
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
they had too many members? Like everybody else kind of throws out there too many guys?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, of course. I don't think. I mean, I think that. I don't think anyone is debating that at this point. I think there were too many. I understand, what they were trying to do. I mean, if you ask Eric Bischoff, I mean, the NWO was going to be its own show. They were going to have their own show, and so they needed a roster. They needed a big roster because it was going to be its own, its own separate organization, its own separate, wrestling promotion. Didn't get to that point because I've sold out, '97. But I understand what he was going for, and it didn't quite work out in that regard. And then what do? You have all these guys. You got Brian Adams, and you got Scott Norton, and you got then you got Ed Horace in the '98. It did get a little. Stevie Ray is in there. It definitely got a little bloated. Especially I think in '98. I think it definitely got. And then you got the Wolfpack, and Conan's in the Wolfpack. Conan, by the way, super over. I think people forget how over Conan was in '98. Dude was one of the most over guys on the freaking roster in '98. But yeah, certainly it got a little bit oversaturated. But hindsight is 2020. I think that there was a vision that Eric had, and things do change, and plans don't always work out. But look, I mean, for the time that it was good, man, it was good. It was real good.
Hell, man, Bischoff was awesome when he was revealed. Remember when Piper? That was so good. He basically, because you kind of, as a fan, you're like,
Yeah.
wow, why isn't Piper fighting Hogan? Like he's kind of
Yep.
ducking him. They
Exactly.
made that make perfect sense because then it was like, wait a
Exactly.
second, Bischoff's lying the whole time. Like what a scumbag! Like these guys.
Mhm.
So like even that was perfect. And then Piper's promo is legendary. Was it windy? Well, how was the road going up to my house? Like him, and then you're like, as a fan,
Yeah.
thinking, where is he going with all this? And then you
Yeah.
realize, shit, Bischoff was a liar. And then you're a
Yeah.
liar. Yeah. So good.
Well, it just made sense because the NWO was getting away with a lot of stuff,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
How were they getting away with that stuff? Well, the WCW boss is actually the guy pulling the strings behind the scenes for the NWO too. So yeah, I mean, as far as continuity, you almost needed that to work, so that the story could continue. Because there's a certain roadblock that if there's no power behind them internally, if there's no inside man, then there's kind of a brick wall in front of you as far as what kind of storytelling you can do. So that was the necessary lever to put, and Bischoff was excellent in that role. I mean, he was really, really, really great as a guy that people could not stand. I mean, he was really, really good. I love you people. Like I mean, doing like I mean, he was just a
Yeah.
great bad guy. And in a group where there were a lot of people in that group that people wanted to cheer, that fans wanted to cheer, Hall and Nash. Uh,
Yep.
there were a lot of people in the NWO that you wanted to cheer because they were freaking cool. Eric Bischoff kind of bit the bullet and became the guy that, all right, we like Hall and Nash, but Eric Bischoff, that guy's a bleepity bleep, and I want to see him get his ass beat by Larry Zbyszko or by Jay Leno or someone like that.
Ric Flair.
But
Yeah.
later on, Ric Flair, yes, of
Yeah.
course, of course.
Yep. So, oh man, the NWO was so good. Who's your favorite NWO member, or who do you think is the best NWO member?
Oh God, okay, how can I answer that? I don't know. Oh God, that's an impossible question because it's a group that's like it's greater than the sum of its parts, but it's also the people in the group, they all had their different qualities that elevated things. It's hard to have it without Hogan turning heel.
Yep.
It's hard to have it without Kevin Nash. It's hard to have it without Scott Hall. It's hard to have it without Eric Bischoff. It's hard to have it without Sean Waldman during a stretch. So it's so hard to say. It's impossible. It's like asking who my favorite child is, John. God, how could you ask me such a hard question? Who's my favorite NWO member? Gosh.
I always say Hall is the best because you can't do it without Hall. I don't know. He's the
Oh,
perfect, like,
pretty.
cool ass guy where you're like, oh, this, like, he could kick ass, but then he's so cool. Like, he's got every quality you'd want. But then I think Hogan's probably the most influential. Like, he needed to turn heel because that's just set the world on fire.
There was something about. I mean, first of all, when Scott Hall is on your TV screen, and remember, I've gone back and I've watched around 400 hours. I'm not.
Right.
My brain is probably mush right now, but when Scott Hall is on the television screen, you are watching what Scott Hall is doing, whether he's talking, whether he's wrestling, whether he's just freaking walking down the aisleway. that is a guy that he exudes so much charisma. He's just so there's just something about that guy. It's a different level. And I don't even think I remembered it as much. Like going back, I it all came back to me just how special he was as a performer. I mean, just an effortlessly cool, charismatic guy. And Nash kind of the same thing. And the thing about Nash too that I loved is that he never Kevin Nash never fit into the wrestling tropes ever. Like he was so out. Everything that he did was outside of the box. Everything that he said and did, it didn't fit with what you would think wrestling is. So it kind of threw you off, which is so perfect for the NWO, like coming down to the ring with a coffee cup. Well, who's the hell is drinking coffee down to the aisle? Like, what? It's Kevin Nash. He's just freaking cool as hell, and he does whatever the f he wants. It's Kevin Nash. Just that kind of stuff. Again, just effortlessly cool. Wearing like FUBU. Doing like the Tupac bandana. I mean, just an effortlessly awesome guy, just a guy that you want to hang out with that guy, like you want to go have a beer with that guy, you want to sit down and have a conversation with a guy like Kevin Nash. He's just freaking cool. And it didn't even matter that he was like 7 feet tall. He was larger than life, even being 7 foot tall, if that makes any sense.
For sure, and never yelled really in his promos, which was
Never
like
needed to.
unique.
You
Yeah.
didn't need to. You want to hear. Everyone's shutting up when Kevin Nash has the microphone. You don't need him to yell. You're watching what that man has to say. And again, never. There's no like his promos. Like there was no tropes. No wrestling cliches. You know what I mean? It was just he just felt like an original. He really felt like an original, and he just felt different than a lot of other things that were going on at the time.
So as we wind it down here, we head towards the finish. Just a couple quick hitters for you.
Yeah,
I know you're a
it
Northeast
was
guy,
fun.
Northeast guys too. Favorite wrestler of all time?
Oh man. Well, as a kid, as a like kid and a teenager, as a kid it was probably like Hulk Hogan and then Ultimate Warrior. Like as a younger kid, because I probably started watching. I was born in the mid '80s, and I started watching probably like in the either late '80s or early '90s. I started pretty young, watching wrestling. Love the Ultimate Warrior as a young kid, and then as I got older, I was a big Shawn Michaels fan. I like Shawn Michaels a lot, and I haven't really thought about it too much as an adult. But I'll stick with Shawn Michaels. I mean, at the time, I thought he was the man.
Favorite promotion?
Oh my. I probably leaned I probably leaned a little bit toward WWF. Being from New York, being from Queens, it was more accessible. I really liked ECW. In as I got a little bit older into my teen years, again they came to Queens, and I went to the Elks Lodge, and I did love ECW, but I guess gun to my head, probably WWF. Now I watch everything. Now I'll go watch Stardom. I'll go watch New Japan. I'll watch some GCW. I watch if there's good wrestling, I want to consume it, no matter where or what it is.
You have a favorite match or like a favorite moment of all time?
Oh boy, that is really hard. Well, so as a kid, we'll start with moments. So as a kid, I vividly remember the angle with Macho Man Randy Savage and Jake the Snake Roberts and Damien the Snake and Elizabeth, and the Snake biting Randy Savage's arm while Macho Man was stuck in the ropes. And I was what was that, 92,
Yep.
91,
92. Yep.
92? So I was probably 6 or 7. Yeah, probably 7 in 92. I'm a writer, so I'm not very good at math. I was born in '84, so I was turning 8 that year. So I was probably 7 when that happened, because it was early in the year. And I remember that happening, and I was 7, and I remember talking with my uncle about this, and he was telling me that wrestling is fake, and I was 7, and I was like, This is indisputable proof, Uncle Joe, that wrestling is real. The snake bit Macho Man's arm. You can't fake that. It's a real snake biting this man's arm. How can wrestling be fake? Wrestling is real. Look at the snake biting Macho Man's arm. I remember that vividly, having that conversation with my uncle. I saw him a few weeks ago, actually. I should have brought that up. But that was a moment that I won't forget.
That was
And then
real.
match,
That was real.
it was, I mean, yeah, he really did bite his arm. They got me. They got me. And then match, oh gosh. I mean, I remember as a kid, and look, I know it's not a great work rate match or anything, but Hogan Warrior in '90 I remember that a lot. The Shawn Michaels Undertaker matches at Mania were awesome. Modern day, gosh. Because I mean the work rate has gotten so good. I saw there's just so much good wrestling now, man. Like there's so much good wrestling. I'm just trying to think of like what my favorite matches that I saw in person, and I've seen so many. I go to a lot of wrestling. Like I don't care. I'll go to anything. I'll go down the street. My girlfriend lives in Mexico. We'll go to Lucha Libre where she lives in Mexico.
Oh, nice.
And it's always fun. I've been to Japan a few times. I've seen a bunch of wrestling in Japan. The Omega Osprey match in January at the Tokyo Dome was absolutely unbelievable. It's one of the best matches I think I've seen in person. But there's been so many. There's been so many. I've been to a bunch of manias now. I'm really, really lucky, because I'm kind of living the dream that like I had as a kid in some ways, where not only do I get to go to all this stuff, but I get to write about it too. So it's just been a great few years. I'm a regular PWG. I live in LA, so I go to PWG, when I can. And there have been some matches there that have been, outstanding. I watch a lot of wrestling, so it's hard for me to pin down just one match because there are so many different styles and different, so I don't want to like discount, I went to all 3 Triple Manias last year in Mexico. I went to all 3.
Wow.
I went to
Awesome.
Tijuana, Monterrey, and Mexico City. I ate a lot of tacos last year, John.
Nice.
I went to Japan. I've been to Japan a bunch of times. Like I said, so I don't know. I can't freaking answer that question. I cannot answer that one.
Too much good stuff. But before we let you go, before we wrap this up, where could everybody kind of find you social
Yeah.
media wise and, see what you're up to and what you're up to next? And of course, with ESPN.
Yeah. So Twitter at Marc Raimondi, MarcRaimondi. Instagram is at Marc Raimondi MMA, MarcRaimondi Of course, ESPN.com/MMA is where most of my stuff will be. Also, ESPN.com's WWE page, which is where all the pro wrestling stuff is going to be. Hoping to have some good news about ESPN coverage of WrestleMania coming soon. I am definitely working on stuff, written stuff before Mania that I think is going to be pretty cool. So please check that out on ESPN.com. As we get closer to Mania, probably that week. I live in LA, so I will definitely be there. I had my credential approved a few days ago, thanks to WWE. So I'll be at Mania again, and hoping to provide some cool coverage and some different angles to stories and in-depth pieces and interviews and what have you. Yeah.
All right, Mark, thank you
And then
so much
I guess
for
I
all
got a
that.
book coming out at some point too. I've been working on the book a lot over the last few months, and
Yeah,
I'm doing
NWO.
a ton of interviews, and I'm getting a lot of interesting information and facts and quotes, and I'm trying to dig as deep as I can on a topic that a lot of people know a good amount about, and a topic that means a lot to a lot of people. So it's like I said earlier, this is definitely a responsibility that I'm not taking lightly, because this is a book that people always ask me, man, like, how's the book going? People that I don't even know, they know I'm writing this book, and I know that they want to read it, so that's like, it's motivating and it's inspiring, to know that, this is an important book to a lot of people.
Is there a working title for the book?
For Life.
Oh, perfect. Nice. I liked it. Yeah, there's a lot of pressure with you with this book.
A lot of pressure,
Yeah.
man. Yeah, whenever someone asks me about that, I kind of get a little anxiety attack. Like I'm working on it. It's not, books don't. I can't just snap my fingers and we got a paperback out there, so but it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. It is really a dream, and I can't wait for everyone. And I'm not done yet. I'm still working on it, but I can't wait for everyone and to see the finished product and have it be a reality. That'll be pretty special.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you so much for all the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, man. This was a lot of fun. Let's do it again sometime.